Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong just because of how you looked or what someone assumed about you? Imagine sitting quietly on a plane, asking for a little help with your bag, only to be shoved aside, not because you were wrong, but because someone decided you weren't the right kind of person. What would you do? Argue, fight, shout, or would you stay silent, knowing the truth inside you was stronger than their prejudice? Now picture this. The woman being humiliated isn't just any passenger. She's the owner of the airline traveling incognito, testing the very culture she built. The flight attendant who pushed her will soon discover that the person she dismissed holds the power to rewrite her fate and the company's entire future. If it were you standing in her place, would you forgive? Or would you make them see what respect truly means? This is a story about dignity, power, and the quiet kind of justice that changes everything. Stay with us till the end, because the twist will stay with you long after the credits roll. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that open hearts and change minds. It happened in less than a second. A soft request, a sharp voice, and then a shove. The kind of moment that makes an entire cabin go silent. The woman stumbled, her shoulder brushing the armrest as her small roller bag slipped from her hand. A quick gasp spread through the rows around her, followed by the metallic clatter of the luggage handle hitting the floor. The flight attendant, a blonde woman with a tight bun and an even tighter expression, froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then her words cut through the air like the snap of a rubber band. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. You're holding up boarding." Her voice was sharp, impatient, and just loud enough for everyone to hear. The woman she had pushed calm, composed, and quietly dignified didn't answer right away. She steadied herself with one hand on the seat back, adjusted her cardigan, and finally said, softly, "That wasn't necessary." Her tone wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind of calm that feels like a mirror reflecting every ounce of disrespect back at the person who gave it. The flight attendant's jaw tightened. She rolled her eyes. "I was just trying to keep the aisle clear," she muttered, already turning away. The passenger didn't respond. She bent down, picked up her fallen notebook, and sat back in her seat. 22B. The cabin was still thick with tension. A few people exchanged glances, whispering. One man, sitting by the window in 22A, leaned slightly toward her. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes. Thank you." The man wanted to say more to call out what he'd just seen, but something about her calm stopped him. There was a presence to her. Not loud, not proud, just centered, like someone who had already decided that the real response would come later. The intercom cracked on overhead. "Cabin crew, prepare for departure." The engines began to hum beneath their feet, and somewhere between the rising pitch of the turbines and the faint chatter of passengers buckling their belts, that single shove became the invisible line between ordinary flight and unforgettable reckoning. 30 minutes earlier, that same woman had walked quietly down Gate C-23 of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. No entourage, no assistant, just a small carry-on, a gray sweater, and a worn leather notebook tucked under one arm. Her boarding pass read Lena Brooks, Seat 22B, Orion Air Flight OA211 to Seattle. But Lena Brooks wasn't her real name. Her real name was Dr. Naomi Carter, 42 years old, aerospace engineer, strategic economist, and unbeknownst to every single person on that aircraft, the new owner and CEO of Orion Air. 6 months earlier, Naomi had quietly purchased the struggling airline through a holding group under her family foundation. Publicly, she was listed only as board chair of the Carter Group, privately. She was leading a top-down cultural overhaul after a wave of complaints about poor service and discrimination. But numbers on a report only told half the story. Naomi wanted to feel the experience firsthand, the discomfort, the attitude, the truth behind the smiles. So she became Lena Brooks, a quiet black woman from Houston visiting her sister in Seattle. No fancy suit, no recognition, just another passenger trying to find her seat in economy. She had flown countless times before, but that morning, something about the atmosphere inside the gate area already felt off. The check-in staff were curt, the boarding announcements rushed, and the senior flight attendant, Melissa Hart, carried herself with the clipped impatience of someone who thought authority excused unkindness. Naomi noticed how Melissa scolded a young father for holding up the line, snapped at an elderly man for not listening, and sighed dramatically at nearly every request. The crew followed her lead, their smiles thin and mechanical. As Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge, the recycled air was thick and heavy. The metallic tang of jet fuel mixed with perfume and fatigue. She heard Melissa behind her saying to a coworker, "Every flight, it's the same chaos, people just don't know how to act." Naomi smiled faintly. She'd spent her career studying systems, and every broken system starts the same way with people who stop caring. Seat 22B, middle row. She had picked it on purpose. Beside her, in 22A, a man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard was scrolling through his phone. His name tag from a tech conference read Tom Willis, software engineer. To her right, 22C sat empty for now. Naomi placed her roller bag in front of her, intending to slide it under the seat once the aisle cleared. She glanced up at the overhead bin. It was already packed tight. She waited, hoping the flight attendants would help redistribute luggage, as they often did. Across the aisle, a young flight attendant, Emily Zhao, was helping a nervous mother with her baby carrier. Her tone was soft, patient, reassuring. Naomi made a mental note of her badge name, Kind Eyes, she thought. Then came Melissa, marching down the aisle like a warden inspecting prisoners. She shut bins with sharp snaps and barked reminders about seat belts. Her presence filled the narrow space, commanding but cold. When Naomi's turn came, she pressed the small overhead call button. The soft ding lit up above her row. Melissa saw it. Her eyes flicked upward, then down toward Naomi. The faintest expression of annoyance crossed her face before she schooled it into her professional mask. She walked toward 22B slowly, each step deliberate, heavy with reluctance. When she stopped beside Naomi, her voice was flat. "Yes," Naomi gestured politely to her bag. "Hi. I was wondering if you could help me lift this one up. The bin above me is full, but I saw a small space just across the aisle." Melissa exhaled sharply through her nose, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she said, "Passengers are responsible for stowing their own luggage. You should have done that earlier. We need to prepare for departure." Naomi nodded once, keeping her tone even. "I understand. I just didn't want to block the aisle." It was a reasonable answer, courteous, but something in that calmness, something in Naomi's self-possession seemed to irritate Melissa even more. Her eyes narrowed, her voice rose slightly. "It's a small bag, ma'am. You can handle it yourself. We're not a moving company." Naomi blinked, still seated, still polite. "I wasn't asking you to be. Just a little help." The phrase "just a little help" echoed down the aisle, and that's when it happened. Melissa reached past her, forcefully shoving the bin door closed. In the same motion, her hand hit Naomi's shoulder hard enough to jolt her back half a step. A collective gasp rippled through the rows. Naomi steadied herself, her eyes locking on the flight attendant's face. For a second, neither spoke. The hum of the engines and the faint rustle of boarding bags filled the silence. Then Melissa snapped, "Sit down. Please. We're closing the cabin." Tom, the passenger beside Naomi, stood up, anger flashing across his face. "Hey, you don't touch people like that." Melissa shot him a glare. "Sir, please stay out of this." Naomi's heart pounded, once then steadied. She wasn't afraid. She was disappointed. Because in that single moment, she saw the entire disease of the airline, the arrogance, the defensiveness, the lack of empathy. She bent down, picked up her notebook, and said quietly, "Let's not delay your departure." Then she sat, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Emily, the young flight attendant, froze a few rows away. Their eyes met for a second, silent understanding passing between them. Emily bit her lip and turned back to her work. Melissa stormed off, muttering something under her breath. Tyler, the cabin manager, appeared briefly, asking, "Everything okay here?" Melissa answered before Naomi could. "She's fine. Just a misunderstanding." Naomi didn't contradict her. She simply opened her notebook and wrote one sentence across the page: "Culture is not what you say, it's what you allow." As the plane pushed back from the gate, the world outside blurred into streaks of silver and blue. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the vibration under her feet, the heartbeat of a system she had vowed to heal. She had seen numbers, spreadsheets, reports about customer dissatisfaction. But this was something else. This was rot. Human rot. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Passengers settled in. Tom leaned slightly toward her again. "Some people shouldn't work with the public," he whispered. Naomi smiled faintly, still looking straight ahead. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe the public deserves better leadership." He didn't understand the double meaning, but he nodded, agreeing anyway. As the plane lifted off, Naomi looked down at her reflection in the window, the quiet woman in the gray sweater who no one thought mattered. No one here knew that she signed the paychecks. No one knew that her signature could change the fate of every person on this plane. She touched her notebook again. Her pen hovered over a blank page. Then she wrote 3 words: "Audit begins today." The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm, a low vibration that filled the cabin like a quiet drumbeat. Clouds rolled past the windows, white against an endless blue. To most people on board, it was just another flight, another 2 hours between Dallas and Seattle. But for Naomi Carter, every minute felt like a mirror reflecting the soul of her airline. She sat still, her seatbelt fastened, her notebook closed on her lap. Around her, passengers shifted into their routines: headphones, coffee, small talk. Life resumed as if nothing had happened. Only Naomi knew how much that moment earlier had revealed. Her mind worked like a camera lens, zooming in on details others would miss. The rushed service, the curt tone, the quiet exhaustion in the younger attendant's eyes. Everything told a story about leadership that had gone numb. When she founded her first company, Naomi had built it around a single rule: leadership begins where empathy starts. But empathy had been lost somewhere between the tight schedules and corporate checklists of Orion Air. It was why she'd chosen to fly incognito today. The company she had bought was broken, not by numbers, but by behavior. She watched as Melissa Hart moved through the aisle, checking belts, snapping trays into place. The woman's smile was painted on, stretched too tight, like a mask that had forgotten how to rest. Every word sounded clipped, mechanical. When a passenger in row 24 asked for water, Melissa poured it without a glance. handing it over as though fulfilling a duty rather than helping a person. Naomi observed quietly. The human temperature of this flight was cold. Across the aisle, Emily Zhao approached an elderly woman who struggled with her blanket. Emily knelt beside her, soft-voiced, patient. The woman's trembling hands relaxed, a simple act, but Naomi felt it a spark of warmth in an otherwise frozen space. She smiled faintly and scribbled in her notebook, "One flame can light a cabin." Tom Willis, beside her, took out his earbuds and leaned closer. "That woman earlier," he said under his breath, "she had no right to treat you that way." Naomi looked up from her page. "Sometimes," she replied, "people forget their job is not just to serve, it's to see." He frowned slightly, not sure what she meant. She added, "Seeing someone's dignity is harder than handing them a drink." Tom nodded, thoughtful. "You sound like someone who's been in management." Naomi smiled without confirming or denying. "Let's just say I care about how people are treated." The intercom buzzed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be cruising at 36,000 feet. Flight time is 2 hours and 30 minutes. The seatbelt light dimmed. Passengers shifted, unbuckling. Conversations bloomed like small flowers after rain. The tension from earlier began to dissolve. But Naomi knew the kind of wounds that didn't show. The quiet humiliation, the glances, the internal voice that says, "You don't belong here." She had felt it before at the start of her career. Fresh out of MIT, first woman of color in her division, she had once been told by a senior engineer that she spoke too confidently for her position. Years later, that same man would report to her. But even now, the echo of those early dismissals lingered in her bones. Melissa's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Snacks. Beverages." Naomi looked up. The tone wasn't kind. It was procedural. The bag of peanuts rattled like coins in Melissa's hand. "I'll have water, please." Melissa poured half a cup, set it down hard enough for droplets to spill onto the tray. "There you go." Naomi dabbed at the drops with a napkin, her movements slow, deliberate. She wanted to say something about kindness, about respect, but she stopped herself. She was here to observe, not to react. Across from her, Emily noticed and quietly placed another napkin on Naomi's tray. Their eyes met again, an unspoken understanding. In a place that felt indifferent, Emily's small gesture mattered more than words. Minutes stretched. The movie screens flickered on. Naomi watched a child giggle 2 rows ahead, waving at the window light. The innocence of it pierced through her fatigue. She thought of her late mother, a flight attendant back when airlines were still glamorous. Her mother had always said, "Every passenger carries a story. You can choose to make it lighter or heavier." Somewhere, her mother's wisdom had been lost in this industry. Now Naomi wanted to find it again. As the plane glided above layers of clouds, Melissa stopped near the galley to whisper to Tyler Reed, the cabin manager. Naomi caught fragments of their conversation, the tone sharp, defensive. She was rude from the start. Melissa hissed, "Some passengers just look for trouble." Tyler sighed, his voice low. "Still, you can't touch passengers." "Melissa, it was barely a touch." She snapped. "If she complains, it'll be my word against hers." Naomi's eyes flicked to her notebook. Another line formed in her mind. "Defensiveness is confession, disguised as pride." Tom glanced at her scribbling. "You're a writer or something." "Something like that," Naomi said with a faint smile. Halfway through the flight, the cabin settled into a soft quiet. Outside, the horizon stretched wide, sun bleeding into a wash of amber light. Naomi let herself breathe, finally, feeling the fatigue of the morning catch up to her. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. In her head, she began to map what she had seen, who needed guidance, who needed to go, and how deep the cultural rot ran. Emily passed again, softly adjusting seatbacks, collecting cups. When she reached Naomi, she paused. "Would you like more water?" "That would be nice." "Thank you." As Emily refilled her glass, she said quietly, "I saw what happened before takeoff. I didn't know what to do." Naomi looked up, her voice low but steady. "You did the right thing. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's observation. But next time, if you see something wrong, use your voice, even softly." Emily hesitated. "You sound like my mentor used to." Naomi smiled, a small warmth flickering in her eyes. "Maybe we had the same kind of teacher?" As Emily walked away, Naomi noticed the way the young woman straightened her shoulders. A little taller now, a little braver. Small ripples, she thought, could still move oceans. The rest of the flight passed in a strange calm. Melissa avoided Naomi's row entirely. Tyler busied himself with paperwork, pretending not to see. Naomi made notes about training gaps, about leadership fatigue, about empathy lost in efficiency. When the captain's voice finally announced descent, she felt a quiet resolve rising in her chest. This wasn't just about a rude attendant. It was about a system that rewarded compliance instead of conscience. The landing gear lowered with a muted thud. The engine softened. Seattle appeared below gray skies, ribbons of water, and a city that always felt like both rain and rebirth. Tom packed his laptop. "Nice flying with you," he said. "You too." Naomi replied, "Safe travels." He hesitated, then added, "I hope you file a complaint. People like that shouldn't represent an airline." Naomi smiled faintly. "Oh, I will. I'll make sure it reaches exactly where it needs to." Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath an undertone of authority that Tom couldn't place. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers began standing, reaching for overhead bags. Naomi remained seated, letting the crowd thin. When she finally rose, she glanced once more toward the galley. Melissa was there, laughing lightly with Tyler, pretending the morning hadn't happened. Naomi felt a small, measured sadness. She didn't hate the woman. She pitied her. Because people like Melissa never realized how fragile power became when stripped of respect. Before stepping off, Naomi turned to Emily, who was saying goodbye to passengers. "You handled today with grace," she said. "Keep that. The company needs more of it." Emily blinked, uncertain why the compliment felt heavier than it sounded. "Thank you, Ms." Naomi paused. "Brooks. Just Brooks." And then she was gone, into the corridor, the gray light of Seattle wrapping around her like quiet armor. As she walked through the terminal, she took out her phone. One message to her chief operating officer, Evelyn Shaw. Just a single-line schedule review with crew OA211. Bring HR confidential. Her thumb hovered over the send button for a second. Then she added another sentence. Prepare audit report, effective immediately. She pressed send. The message delivered with a soft chime, the digital equivalent of a gavel. Naomi exhaled, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. The world outside the glass was gray and restless, but inside her chest there was clarity. She had seen enough to begin. Tomorrow would not be about revenge. It would be about responsibility. And by the time Melissa Hart received her meeting notice, she still wouldn't know who she had pushed that morning at Gate C-23. But she was about to find out Morning light poured through the tall windows of Melissa Hart's small apartment, cutting across piles of uniforms and unopened mail. Her alarm had gone off 3 times before she finally rolled over, squinting at the phone in her hand. The subject line of the newest email made her stomach tighten. Mandatory meeting, Orion Air Headquarters, Seattle, 9:00 mem. It came with no explanation. Just a line that said all flight crew from Flight OA211 are required to attend. Attendance is not optional. She groaned, swinging her legs out of bed. Probably another pointless debrief, she muttered, rubbing her temples. People complain about everything these days. In the kitchen, the coffee machine sputtered, the smell of burnt beans filling the air. She stared out the window at the gray drizzle falling over the city, unaware that today would be the day her whole world cracked open. Across town, Tyler Reed buttoned his shirt in the mirror, his nerves already tight. He had never been called to a corporate meeting before. Managers like him usually handled things quietly on the ground. The fact that headquarters wanted him there meant trouble. He remembered the woman from 22B, the calm one, the one Melissa had pushed. Something about her composure still haunted him. He told himself it was nothing, that passengers complained all the time. Still, a voice in his head whispered, "What if it isn't just a complaint this time?" By 8:30, they were both walking through the glass doors of Orion Tower, the company's shimmering new headquarters in downtown Seattle. The lobby gleamed with white marble floors, polished steel, and a towering sculpture shaped like wings. Melissa had only been here once for a safety training seminar, and even then, she'd felt out of place. Now, as she walked past the receptionist, she noticed something different. The air felt heavier, quieter, charged. The receptionist smiled politely. "Conference room B, 23rd floor." "Thanks," Melissa replied, forcing confidence into her voice. She looked at Tyler. Probably just some overblown HR check. He nodded, but didn't answer. The elevator doors slid open. Inside, the mirrored walls reflected their faces. Melissa's chin high, her eyes sharp with irritation. Tyler's expression pale and uneasy. The ride up felt longer than it should have. When the doors opened, the hallway was empty except for a single woman standing near the end. Evelyn Shaw, the chief operating officer of Orion Air. Her suit was immaculate, her tone professional but cool. "Good morning," she said. "Right this way. Please." Melissa straightened, a spark of defensiveness lighting in her chest. She followed Evelyn into the conference room, where 2 other executives sat at a long table. A large monitor glowed at the far end, its screen black. Waiting. "Take a seat," Evelyn said. Melissa and Tyler obeyed. The air conditioning hummed softly. No one spoke. Then, with a faint click, the monitor came to life. A woman's silhouette appeared against the panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. She stood facing the window, hands clasped behind her back, posture calm and precise. When she turned, Melissa's breath caught. It was her. The passenger from 22B. For a moment, Melissa didn't believe what she was seeing. The woman's hair was tied neatly, her gray sweater replaced by a tailored navy suit. Her voice, low and steady, filled the room through the speakers. "Good morning," she said. "I believe you both remember me from Flight OA211. Tyler's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Melissa froze, her pulse pounding. How are you?" The woman smiled, faintly but not warmly. "I'm Dr. Naomi Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Orion Air." Silence dropped like a curtain. Evelyn stepped forward, folding her hands. "Dr. Carter has requested to speak with you personally before we proceed." Naomi's tone was calm, but beneath it was an unmistakable weight, measured, deliberate, mercilessly clear. "On the morning of Flight OA-2011, I boarded under the name Lena Brooks. I wanted to experience our service as any other passenger would. What I witnessed confirmed what I feared: disrespect, arrogance, and a culture of dismissal. The kind that spreads from one bad interaction until it poisons an entire system." Melissa's throat tightened. "I didn't know if I had known." Naomi raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The words hung heavy in the air. Evelyn pressed a button on a remote, and the monitor changed. A video played. The image was shaky, filmed from a phone several rows behind, but clear enough. Melissa pushing Naomi's shoulder as she closed the overhead bin. The small gasp of the passengers. The sound of Tom Willa's voice saying, "Hey, you don't touch people like that." The recording ended. Naomi's voice remained steady. "I didn't come here to embarrass you, Ms. Hart. I came here because what happened on that plane wasn't an isolated incident. It was the symptom of something bigger. Our passengers trust us with their safety and comfort. When we fail them, we fail our promise." Melissa's face flushed red. I've been under pressure. Short staffing. Double shifts. I didn't mean to offend anyone. Intent," Naomi said quietly, "is not the same as impact." Tyler finally spoke, voice shaky. "Dr. Carter, I should have reported it right away. I didn't. I'm sorry." Naomi looked at him, her expression softening just slightly. "Oh, accountability starts when we stop pretending silence is neutral. Thank you for admitting that." Melissa's composure began to crumble. "Are you firing me?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer to the camera, her eyes unwavering. "I'm holding you responsible, Ms. Hart. But what happens next will depend on what you learn from this moment." Evelyn opened a folder and slid a paper across the table. "We're placing you on suspension pending termination review. HR will contact you regarding next steps." Melissa's hands trembled. She tried to speak, but the words came out brittle. "I've given this airline 15 years. Naomi's voice softened, though it never lost its firmness. "Then you should know better than anyone how much 15 seconds of disrespect can undo 15 years of service." The sentence landed like a verdict. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the rain against the windows filled the silence. Melissa's eyes darted between Evelyn, Tyler, and the screen, as though searching for someone to take her side. "No one did," Naomi finally said. "This isn't about punishment. It's about change. We're rebuilding Orion Air from the inside out, and that begins today." Evelyn nodded. "You may go now." Melissa stood, her legs shaky. She didn't look back as she walked out the door. When it closed behind her, Tyler remained seated, staring at his hands. Naomi's voice came again, quieter now. "Mr. Reed, you'll stay. We have work to do." He looked up, confused. Work. Naomi's expression softened slightly. "You saw what was wrong. Next time, I expect you to act. I'm giving you a choice. Stay silent, or help rebuild something better." "I want to help," he said quickly, a mix of fear and relief in his tone. "Good," Naomi replied. "Then start by learning from those who still remember why kindness matters. Emily Zhao will be promoted to lead our new training program. You'll assist her." Tyler blinked. "Emily? She's only been with us a year." "Sometimes," Naomi said, "it takes fresh eyes to see what jaded ones have forgotten." Evelyn turned off the screen. But Naomi's image lingered in Tyler's mind. The calm certainty, the quiet authority. Outside, as Melissa walked through the lobby clutching her coat, she saw passengers checking in for flights, smiling, laughing, rolling bags across the polished floor. For the first time, she realized how invisible she had made them all seem. She stopped near the exit, staring at a billboard on the wall. It showed a photo of an Orion airplane flying through sunlight, with the slogan, "Every passenger matters." Her throat tightened. She turned away. Upstairs, Naomi stood by the window in her office, the same skyline behind her. The meeting had gone as expected, but the satisfaction she thought she'd feel never came. Instead, there was only quiet resolve. She whispered to herself, "Justice isn't revenge, it's repair." Behind her, Evelyn approached. "The team is ready for the audit rollout," she said. "You sure you want to lead it personally?" Naomi turned, her gaze steady. "I started this mission in seat 22B. I'll finish it in every row." Outside, rain streaked down the glass, tracing silver lines across the city. Somewhere in the distance, a plane lifted off, its lights cutting through the gray. Inside, Naomi picked up her notebook and wrote, "Respect is not optional, it's policy." The next morning, a quiet hum lingered over Orion Tower. It wasn't the usual rhythm of a corporate office. It was heavier, charged with whispers and curiosity. Employees passed glances in the corridors, clutching their coffee cups as though caffeine could steady the unease. Something had shifted overnight. People spoke Naomi Carter's name in careful tones, half awe, half fear. Inside her office, sunlight broke through the blinds, cutting stripes of gold across the dark wood desk. Naomi sat motionless for a moment, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the window. Her expression was calm, but her thoughts were loud. The meeting with Melissa Hart had not satisfied her. It had revealed more cracked systemic fractures hidden beneath layers of corporate politeness. Evelyn Shaw stepped in quietly, holding a thin tablet. "The footage has gone viral," she said. "Someone leaked it. Passenger video from the flight. It's on social media already." Naomi didn't turn. "How about 500,000 views in 2 hours?" Comments are mixed. Some defending the crew, most condemning it. The press has picked it up. Naomi exhaled, slow and measured. "We can't control the narrative, but we can define it." Evelyn nodded, setting the tablet on the desk. "PR's drafting a statement." "I'll write my own," Naomi said. "Truth travels farther than spin." She opened her notebook, the same one she'd carried on the flight. The words she wrote now were not for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt unseen at 30,000 feet. Respect isn't customer service, it's character. Downstairs, in a modest apartment across the city, Melissa sat curled on her couch, scrolling through her phone. The video was everywhere: headlines, hashtags, endless commentary. Her name wasn't public yet, but people were speculating. She could already feel the walls closing in. Every sound from her phone made her jump. She read one comment aloud in disbelief. "That flight attendant should be fired. You don't treat people like that." Another said, "Power changes when the silent speak." Her stomach twisted. She wanted to scream that it wasn't fair that she had been under stress, that the woman hadn't said who she was, that she had made one mistake. But deep down, Melissa knew it wasn't just one moment. It was years of small cruelties, each one easier than the last. She put the phone face down and pressed her palms to her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel angry. She felt hollow. At that very moment, across the city, Emily Zhao was sitting in a small cafe near the water, her Orion Air badge still clipped to her coat pocket. The news had reached her too. She kept rereading the company memo Emily Zhao to lead Passenger Dignity Training Initiative under direct supervision of CEO Dr. Naomi Carter. She could hardly believe it. She was 27, 1 year into her career, and now she was part of something that felt bigger than her title, something that could reshape an entire airline. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Naomi. Meet me at headquarters, 2 p.m. I want your perspective. By the time Emily arrived, Naomi was reviewing old employee reports. The data told a grim story. 63 complaints in the last year alone for discourteous service. But what struck her more were the patterns, the same names, the same roots, the same excuses. When Emily entered, Naomi gestured for her to sit. You were there that day? Tell me what you saw, not as an employee, but as a person. Emily hesitated. I saw fear, she said softly, not just from passengers, from the crew, too. Everyone's afraid of being punished, so they pass the pressure down. It becomes habit. Naomi nodded, taking notes. Pressure is no excuse for cruelty, but understanding it is how we end it. Emily's voice grew steadier. People follow tone. If leadership acts like kindness is weakness, that's what spreads. Naomi smiled faintly. That's why you're sitting here. Later that day, Naomi drafted the official company statement herself. It read simply at Orion Air, we believe respect is not earned, it is owed. An incident aboard Flight OA 211 revealed that we failed to uphold that principle. Effective immediately, we are implementing a company-wide dignity training program, led by our crew, for our crew. This is not about blame. It's about becoming better. Well, when the message went public, the reaction was instant. Major news outlets praised her transparency. Passengers shared stories of being treated poorly on other airlines, calling Naomi's approach revolutionary. The hashtag #OshOrionPromise began trending within hours, but not everyone was pleased. Inside the airline's older management ranks, some whispered that Naomi's reforms were too idealistic, that she didn't understand the realities of airline work. One anonymous email even warned her to let it blow over before you break morale. She read it once, then deleted it. She wasn't here to maintain comfort. She was here to build conscience. 3 days later, Naomi called another meeting, this time with the entire senior operations team. As she entered the boardroom, conversation stopped mid-sentence. She placed her notebook on the table and began without preamble. We are not fixing a PR problem, she said. We are fixing a moral one. What happened on OA 211 is not an isolated incident. It's evidence of what happens when empathy becomes optional. Someone in the back, an older director named Paul Stanton, raised his hand. With respect, Dr. Carter, you're new to this industry. Flight attendants deal with impossible passengers every day. They're human too. Naomi met his gaze evenly. And that's exactly why we must build systems that support humanity on both sides. Compassion doesn't cancel discipline. It defines it. No one argued after that. As the meeting ended, Evelyn lingered behind. You know this will make enemies, she said quietly. Naomi smiled faintly. Good. It means the right people are uncomfortable. That evening, while Seattle's skyline shimmered under rain, Naomi returned home to her apartment overlooking the Sound. She made tea and sat by the window, notebook open. For the first time since the flight, she allowed herself to breathe fully. She thought about Melissa, wondered what she was feeling now. Regret, anger, denial. Maybe all of it. She thought about Emily, young and brave, carrying the weight of new responsibility. And she thought about herself how easily she could have lost her temper that morning on the plane. How much power there was in choosing calm over fury. Her phone buzzed. A message from Tom Willis, the passenger who defended her. Somehow, he had found her professional email. It read, "Didn't know who you were that day, but thank you for showing what grace looks like under pressure. Made me rethink how I treat people too." Naomi smiled. She typed back one line. "It starts with one flight." Across town, Melissa sat alone in the dark, watching the news replay the clip again. The anchor's voice was calm. Dr. Naomi Carter, the airline CEO, was traveling incognito when she experienced the mistreatment firsthand. Her leadership response has sparked a nationwide conversation about dignity in travel. Melissa muted the TV. The sound of rain outside was steady, relentless. She stood, walked to the mirror, and stared at her reflection. The woman staring back looked smaller, older, tired. For the first time, she whispered aloud, "I did that. I pushed her." The word stung more than any headline. She picked up her phone, opened her email, and hesitated for a long moment before typing, "Dr. Carter, I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but I understand now. If there's a way I can make things right, I'm willing to learn." When she hit send, she didn't know if Naomi would ever reply, but somehow, writing it felt like the first honest thing she'd done in years. Up in her office, Naomi read the message hours later. She closed her eyes for a long moment, letting the silence settle. Then she typed her response. "Growth begins where excuses end. Let's talk." The next morning, as the sun rose over the misty Seattle skyline, the world outside was beginning to change slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Orion Air's name, once synonymous with tired service and cynical smiles, was now being spoken with something close to hope. Naomi sipped her tea and looked out the window. "Justice," she murmured to herself, "isn't a hammer. It's a hand that rebuilds." And in that quiet, she began to plan the next chapter, not of punishment, but of restoration. By the fourth day after the video surfaced, Orion Air had become the most searched name on social media. Hashtags like "Yes or Orion Promise" and "Dignity" in flight trended across the United States. Talk shows dissected the incident from every angle, some praising Naomi Carter for her restraint and leadership, others accusing her of orchestrating a publicity stunt. News anchors repeated the same clip again and again, the push, the gasp, the calm face of a woman who never raised her voice. The world was obsessed not just with what had happened, but with how she had responded. Naomi watched the coverage from her office in quiet reflection. The screen showed pundits debating airline culture, racial bias, and corporate accountability. She muted the volume. She didn't need commentary to know what the story had become. It was no longer about her. It was about what she represented. Evelyn entered, her steps brisk. "We've got reporters camped outside the building again. CNN wants a live interview this afternoon." Naomi shook her head. "Not yet. Let them talk for now. Truth needs patience before it needs microphones." Evelyn sighed. "They'll spin it anyway." "Then let them." Naomi replied, "Spinning stories isn't new, but honesty always finds an audience." She turned back to the window, watching the drizzle streak the glass. "Besides, I'm more interested in what happens after the cameras stop." Across town, Melissa Hart sat at her kitchen table, staring at the same storm through her own window. Her email inbox was full, some messages from strangers sending hate, others offering sympathy, a few asking for interviews. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications she couldn't bear to open. Every sound felt like judgment. Kevin, her fiancé, had started avoiding her calls. When he finally answered that morning, his tone was cold. "Mel, my boss saw the video. The company's not happy. Maybe we should take some space." She gripped the phone tighter. "Space, Kevin. I'm being destroyed out here. I just need time." "Okay." He hung up before she could respond. The silence that followed was suffocating. Melissa pressed her hands to her face, her breath shallow. The career she'd built for 15 years, the relationship she thought was solid, the identity she had wrapped around her uniform, all of it was unraveling at once. By late afternoon, Naomi's communications director entered her office holding a folder. "We need to discuss the next move. The narrative's split. If we don't control it, someone else will." Naomi leaned back in her chair. "What's the worst of it?" The director hesitated. "Melissa's fiancé posted a video defending her. Says you humiliated an employee to look like a hero. It's getting traction." Naomi felt a flicker of irritation but masked it quickly. Then released the full passenger statement, Tom Willis's version, unedited. Evelyn frowned. "Are you sure that means releasing his name publicly?" "I already spoke to him," Naomi said. "He gave permission. He said people need to see what really happened." That evening, Orion Air's official account uploaded the footage. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. The video showed the moment clearly. The shove, the tension, the calm voice that followed. Then it cut to Tom's interview, recorded in his Seattle office. He spoke plainly. "I watched her stay calm when anyone else would have yelled. She didn't use power to humiliate. She used grace to expose the truth." The video ended with Orion Air's message, "Dignity doesn't depend on position. It depends on principle." Within hours, the tide shifted. Comments flooded. "And this is leadership. Finally, someone showing power can be humble. This woman's composure teaches more than any corporate speech ever could." Melissa saw the new video too. Her heart sank. She felt her own justifications collapsing, stripped bare by truth. The next day, her GoFundMe page set up by a friend who believed she was unfairly targeted was taken down after viewers saw the evidence. Donations reversed. The internet that had briefly pitied her now turned away. Meanwhile, Emily Zhao walked through Orion Air's training center, preparing for the first meeting of what Naomi had named the Passenger Dignity Program. The walls were bare. The air smelled faintly of coffee and new carpet. She was nervous but determined. Her mentor had given her a platform, and she wouldn't waste it. Naomi joined her quietly, hands clasped behind her back. "You've done well," she said, looking around. "This room feels different already. Hopeful." Emily smiled. "I just want people to remember what this job really means." Naomi nodded. "Remind them that flying is a privilege for both sides of the aisle." Outside news vans lined the street. For the first time, not all of them were chasing scandal. Some were telling stories of reform. That night, Naomi agreed to a single interview, a pre-recorded conversation for a Sunday feature on leadership. The lights were bright. The cameras, still. The host leaned forward and asked, "Dr. Carter, when that flight attendant pushed you, why didn't you speak up right there? Most people would have." Naomi smiled faintly. "Because anger would have made me smaller than the problem. I wanted to understand it, not become it." The host nodded. "Do you think forgiveness has a place in corporate accountability?" Naomi paused, considering. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's allowing growth, and growth only happens in truth. The clip aired the next evening and was replayed across multiple networks. It struck a chord far beyond airline discussions. Church groups, educators, and even business schools shared her words as examples of calm authority. By the end of the week, Naomi's inbox overflowed with letters, some from passengers, others from employees, even from people who'd never flown Orion Air, but said her actions restored their faith in fairness. But amidst the praise, she received one message that made her stop. It was from Melissa. "Dr. Carter, I saw your interview. I can't defend what I did, but I need to know if there's any way to make amends not for my job, but for myself." Naomi reread the message twice. Then she called Evelyn. "I want to see her," she said. The next morning, Melissa arrived at headquarters again. She looked smaller, humbled, her eyes tired but sincere. Security escorted her up to the same conference room where her career had ended. Naomi was waiting, dressed simply this time. No cameras, no audience. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Naomi gestured for her to sit. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Naomi said. "I almost didn't," Melissa admitted. "But I kept thinking about that day. I keep seeing myself, hearing my own voice. It's ugly." Naomi nodded. "Recognition is the beginning of repair." Melissa swallowed. "I'm sorry. I can't undo it, but I want to help somehow." Naomi studied her carefully, searching for pretense and finding none. "There's a place in our new program for people who can teach from failure. You'll never wear the uniform again, but you can help train others on what not to become." Melissa blinked, surprised. "You'd trust me with that?" "I don't have to trust you," Naomi said softly. "I just have to believe you can change. That's harder, but it lasts longer." Tears filled Melissa's eyes. "Thank you. I don't deserve it." "No one deserves forgiveness," Naomi said. "That's what makes it powerful." When Melissa left that day, the air outside felt different, like rain after drought. For the first time in months, she breathed without shame, crushing her chest. Later, Naomi sat with Evelyn in her office. "You know what this means, right?" Evelyn said. "You're not just rebuilding an airline. You're rebuilding people." Naomi looked out at the horizon. The clouds were clearing. A plane rose through the sunlight, wings glinting gold. "Maybe that's what leadership really is," she said. "Teaching people to rise without pushing others down." And in that quiet, Evelyn realized that what had begun as a scandal had turned into something far larger. A movement born not from outrage, but from grace. Spring sunlight spilled across Seattle's skyline, turning the steel of Orion Tower into a mirror of gold. For the first time in months, the air in the building didn't feel heavy. It felt awake. Employees walked the halls with cautious optimism, exchanging quiet greetings. The tension that had once shadowed every corner was loosening, replaced by something that almost felt like pride. Naomi Carter stood in front of a wide digital screen in the training center's main hall. The words, "Passenger Dignity Program Orientation," glowed in blue. Emily Zhao stood beside her, holding a slim binder filled with lesson plans and handwritten notes. She was nervous but glowing with purpose. Naomi had seen leaders rise from ambition before, but Emily was different. Hers came from empathy. Naomi adjusted the microphone clipped to her collar. "You ready for this?" she asked softly. Emily nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." The doors opened, and dozens of flight attendants filed in, some skeptical, some curious, others hopeful. Among them sat Melissa Hart, in plain clothes, no uniform, head bowed, but posture steady. She sat near the back, quietly listening. Her role wasn't to lead, Not yet. Today, she was here to learn how to rebuild. Naomi took a slow breath and began speaking. When I first boarded flight OA-211, I wasn't Dr. Naomi Carter. I was a passenger named Lena Brooks. I wanted to see what this airline truly felt like, not from reports or numbers, but from human moments. What I saw was both painful and powerful. Painful because it showed how far we'd drifted from empathy. Powerful because it revealed that one small act of kindness can still shift everything. Her voice carried a calm conviction that filled the room. Today isn't about blame. It's about starting over. About remembering why we serve, not just to move people, but to honor them. A ripple of quiet emotion passed through the crowd. Emily took over, leading a presentation on the new curriculum: communication, emotional awareness, crisis compassion. Each section was grounded in real-life stories from passengers. Naomi had insisted on that no corporate jargon, only truth. During a break, Naomi noticed Melissa lingering near the coffee station. She approached quietly. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Melissa looked surprised, but met her gaze. "Better. It's strange being here without a badge." "You're still part of this," Naomi said. "Titles don't define contribution." Melissa hesitated, then nodded. "I want to make this right. I don't know if people will ever see me differently, but I'm trying." "They will," Naomi said gently. "But start by seeing yourself differently first." As the day continued, the energy in the room shifted. Attendants who had walked in skeptical began to lean forward, to share experiences. One spoke about losing patience with passengers after years of exhaustion. Another admitted that she had learned to fake smiles just to survive her shifts. The stories were raw, vulnerable. For once, they weren't hiding behind procedure, they were human again. By the end of the session, the applause was genuine. Naomi felt it in her chest, like a quiet drumbeat of hope. Afterward, she lingered as the room emptied, the echo of voices fading. Emily joined her, eyes bright. "It worked," she said softly. "People are opening up." Naomi smiled. "Change starts with conversation. Then it becomes culture." Later that evening, Naomi sat alone in her office, reviewing the new internal surveys. The feedback surprised her. Words like "heard, seen," "valued" appeared again and again. For the first time, employees weren't afraid to speak honestly. The numbers showed it too. Customer satisfaction had climbed nearly 12% since the reforms began. But more than the data, it was the tone of the messages that struck her. People were hopeful. Evelyn entered, holding 2 cups of tea. "You've stirred something real," she said, handing one to Naomi. "Even the unions are calling this a model for empathy training." Naomi sipped her tea, thoughtful. Empathy shouldn't be revolutionary. It should be normal. Evelyn laughed quietly. "Normal doesn't trend. Revolution does." Naomi smiled. "Then let's make kindness revolutionary." The following week, Naomi flew again, this time under her real name, sitting quietly in economy beside everyday travelers. She wanted to see if the changes were real or just surface-level compliance. The difference was immediate. The flight attendants greeted passengers with warmth, not mechanical routine. They checked in, smiled with sincerity, made small talk that didn't feel forced. Halfway through the flight, Emily appeared in uniform, shadowing the crew as part of the new leadership program. She spotted Naomi and smiled knowingly, but didn't approach. This was Naomi's moment to observe, not to be recognized. An elderly man across the aisle dropped his water bottle. Instantly, a young attendant bent down to help him, murmuring, "Take your time, sir." The kindness was so simple, yet it struck Naomi like a spark. That was what she'd been fighting for: unseen dignity. Small mercies that ripple through the air like warmth. When the plane landed, Naomi lingered at her seat. The crew lined up at the front, thanking passengers. As she exited, the late attendant, someone she didn't know, smiled and said, "Thank you for flying with us, Dr. Carter." Naomi paused, surprised. "You recognized me." The attendant nodded. "Everyone knows your story. It changed the way we see our job." Naomi smiled gently. "Then keep that story alive, even when no one's watching." That night, back in Seattle, Naomi received an unexpected call from the Department of Transportation. A formal award ceremony was being planned for her leadership in promoting equality and reform in the aviation industry. She declined the initial invitation. "I didn't do it for recognition," she told Evelyn later. Evelyn grinned. "Maybe not, but recognition helps the message travel." Meanwhile, Melissa had begun assisting Emily with workshops, sharing her experience as a cautionary story. The first time she spoke, the room was tense. Everyone knew who she was. But when she began to talk, her voice was steady, stripped of pride. "I thought professionalism was about control," she said, "about making passengers obey rules. But control without compassion isn't strength. It's fear in disguise." By the end, the room was silent. Someone in the back started clapping. Soon, everyone joined. Melissa stood there, overwhelmed, tears shining in her eyes. For the first time since the scandal, she felt seen not as the villain of a story, but as part of its redemption. Later, Naomi watched a recording of that session. When Melissa said, "We can't change the past, but we can be the apology that keeps others from repeating it," Naomi paused the video and smiled. That was it. That was the message the world needed to hear. A week later, Naomi approved a new campaign for Orion Air. The tagline read, "Respect is not policy, it's practice." The commercial didn't feature celebrities or polished actors. It showed real employees, from pilots to janitors, telling their stories about what dignity meant to them. The ad went viral within hours, not because it was glossy, but because it was real. That evening, as Naomi left her office, she passed by the giant Orion Air logo in the lobby. For the first time, she didn't see it as a company. She saw it as a promise. She whispered softly, "Every passenger, every crew, every moment." Outside, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. She felt tired but fulfilled. Change was never glamorous. It was slow, messy, and deeply human. But it was happening one conversation, one flight, one person at a time. The next morning, she received another message. It was from Marcus Hill, the young passenger who had filmed the original video. He had been quiet through the entire storm, avoiding publicity. His message was short. "Dr. Carter, thank you for turning one moment of injustice into a movement of decency. The world needed that." Naomi smiled as she read it. Then she closed her eyes and thought of her mother's old saying, "A flight is only successful when everyone lands with dignity." And for the first time, she believed they were finally getting there. 2 months after the launch of the Passenger Dignity Program, the transformation within Orion Air was no longer just visible, it was tangible. The once sterile atmosphere of its airports now carried a quiet warmth. Smiles at check-in counters were genuine, not forced. Crew members helped passengers before being asked. It was as if the company had rediscovered its heart. And yet, for Naomi Carter, the work was far from finished. True change, she knew, didn't end with applause. It began when the noise faded. That morning, Naomi stood at the window of her office, overlooking the Seattle waterfront. The sky was streaked with early orange, the kind of light that made the city look almost forgiving. Evelyn Shaw entered with 2 cups of coffee, her usual start-of-day ritual. "Early again," Evelyn said with a small grin. Naomi smiled, taking a sip. "I like watching the city wake up. It reminds me that we're all trying, no matter how messy it gets." Evelyn nodded. "You've done something extraordinary. Naomi, passenger satisfaction's up 20 points. Applications for new hires have doubled." And she paused. "The Department of Transportation confirmed they're adopting elements of our program as a national model." Naomi set her cup down slowly. National Evelyn nodded. "They want you to present it at their upcoming Aviation Leadership Summit in DAC." Naomi leaned back in her chair. "That's unexpected. It's your chance to take this movement beyond Orion," Evelyn said. "You always said this wasn't just about one airline." Naomi smiled faintly. "I did. But part of me worries that if this becomes a trend, people will treat it like a slogan, not a soul. Then remind them of the soul." Evelyn replied simply. Across town, Emily Zhao walked briskly through the training center, clipboard in hand. She was preparing for another round of workshops. Attendance had doubled since the first session, and now teams from other airlines were quietly asking to join. The energy was contagious, but Emily felt the weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders. She found Melissa Hart already setting up chairs. The former flight attendant's transformation had been quiet but remarkable. She moved with humility, no longer trying to command attention, just wanting to help. Emily smiled as she entered. "You're early again." Melissa shrugged. "Old habits, except this time, I'm using them for something good." Emily laughed softly. "You've become my right hand. You know that I'm just grateful to still be part of something," Melissa said. "Naomi gave me a chance when no one else would. I'm not wasting it." When the first group arrived, Emily began with a story, one that Melissa had shared the week before. She told them about the day Melissa realized that a uniform could either shield compassion or smother it. Her honesty broke down the walls between instructor and trainee. By the end of the day, the group left not just informed, but changed. Meanwhile, Naomi's days were filled with meetings, media interviews, and preparations for the summit. Though she disliked the spotlight, she understood its necessity. The world listened more closely to those who had once been silenced. Late one evening, as she sat reviewing her speech draft, she received a message from Marcus Hill, the young man who had recorded the original incident. He had kept in touch occasionally, updating her on how the experience had shaped his perspective. This time, his message was different. "Dr. Carter, I've been accepted into the journalism fellowship program I told you about. My essay was about you, about how you showed that integrity doesn't need an audience. Thank you for inspiring me." Naomi read the message twice, her heart tightening. She typed back, "I'm proud of you. Marcus, use your words to make truth louder, not cruelty." She stared at the screen for a moment after sending it. The thought that her quiet decision months ago rippled this far humbled her deeply. It reminded her why she'd chosen patience over anger that day. As the day of the summit approached, pressure mounted. Reporters speculated about what Naomi would say, calling her the voice of modern aviation ethics. She found the label unsettling. She wasn't trying to be a symbol, she was trying to be a reminder. The night before her flight to Washington, she visited the maintenance hangar unannounced. Mechanics, ground staff, and crew were wrapping up their shifts. When they saw her, some straightened, Others smiled shyly. She greeted each of them, asking about their families, their days, their challenges. One older mechanic, Joe Ramirez, looked up from his tools and said, "You know, ma'am, in 30 years I've seen plenty of CEOs come and go. But you're the first one who actually listens." Naomi smiled gently. "That's the only way to learn." "Joe," he chuckled. "Well, keep doing it. Feels like people actually care again." That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She walked through her quiet apartment, barefoot, the city lights painting patterns across her walls. Her mind replayed the journey, the shove, the humiliation, the meeting, the rebuilding. Every step had carved its mark into her. "In the stillness," she whispered to herself, "change starts small. But if it's honest, it never stops." The next morning, she boarded her flight to D.C. The irony of flying never lost on her. As she settled into her seat, a young flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Good morning, Dr. Carter. It's an honor to have you with us." Naomi returned the smile. "Thank you. It's an honor to see you doing this job with heart." During the flight, she noticed how attentive the crew was, how small gestures, like helping an elderly passenger with her bag or kneeling to speak kindly to a nervous traveler, spoke louder than any policy could. It was the culture she had dreamed of, alive before her eyes. When the plane landed, a round of polite applause filled the cabin. The captain announced over the speaker, "Ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to have on board the woman who reminded our entire industry what dignity in the sky truly means, Dr. Naomi Carter." The passengers turned, clapping warmly. Naomi felt her cheeks flush, but lifted a hand in quiet acknowledgement. She wasn't used to applause. It always felt like it belonged to the movement, not her. At the summit the next day, the grand ballroom was filled with executives, journalists, and policymakers. Cameras lined the back wall. Naomi stood behind the podium, taking a moment before she began. She started simply, "I didn't come here to give a speech. I came to tell a story." She recounted the events of Flight OA211 not with dramatics, but with sincerity. She spoke of Melissa, of Emily, of every person who had turned shame into strength. "People think reform starts with rules," she said. "But it starts with reflection. We can build faster planes and fancier cabins, but if we can't carry empathy with us, we're still grounded." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Naomi continued, "The sky is a mirror. It reflects who we are when no one's watching. Every seat on a plane is a small piece of humanity, and our job is to protect it. If we fail at that, we don't deserve to fly." When she finished, the room erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but the resonant, emotional kind that carries gratitude. Tears shone in a few eyes. Journalists stood, cameras flashing. But Naomi only smiled softly, letting the moment pass through her like a breeze. Afterward, Evelyn approached her backstage. "You did it," she said, pride glowing in her eyes. Naomi shook her head. "No, we did it. Every person who chose kindness instead of control did it." That night, as she looked out over the city lights of Washington, Naomi thought of all the people she'd met since that fateful flight, the broken, the brave, the ones still learning. The world was far from perfect, but it was listening again. And that, she thought, was enough for now. The morning after Naomi's speech in Washington, D.C., the city was buzzing. News outlets hailed her address as one of the most moving talks in recent aviation history. Phrases like the soul of leadership and the quiet revolution of empathy filled headlines. Overnight, Orion Air's name became a global symbol of reform. And Naomi Carter's calm strength became something larger than corporate success. It became a moral reference point. But for Naomi, the applause faded as quickly as it came. She sat by her hotel window that morning, untouched breakfast beside her, watching sunlight filter through the curtains. Success, she knew, was a fragile thing. For every hand that clapped, there was another waiting to pull her back down. The real test wasn't winning hearts. It was keeping integrity when the world began to expect perfection. Her phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn. "Call me ASAP. Something's happening at HQ." Naomi's pulse quickened as she called back. Evelyn's voice was tense. "There's a leak, an internal memo from the union rep. It accuses you of using the incident for publicity. Claims the reforms are creating unrealistic pressure on staff." Naomi exhaled slowly. "And the media? They're running with it. Some outlets are framing you as exploiting trauma for branding. Hashtags are shifting. Right, empathy, or marketing is trending." Naomi pressed her hand to her forehead. "So it begins," she murmured. She booked an early flight home that evening. As she walked through the terminal, she saw her own face on television screens, lining the concourse clips of her speech juxtaposed with commentators debating her motives. Is Dr. Naomi Carter genuine? Or is this another corporate image play? She kept her head down and moved quietly toward her gate. When she boarded the flight, Emily Zhao was already waiting in her seat. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Surprised. "I thought you'd still be in Seattle," Naomi said. Emily smiled faintly. "When the internet starts eating its heroes, I figured you shouldn't fly alone." Naomi chuckled softly. "You're learning the ropes of leadership faster than I expected." The flight took off under a crimson sunset. For a long while, both women sat in silence, the hum of the engines filling the space between them. Then Naomi spoke quietly. "People crave stories that end neatly, but real change is messy. It scares them." Emily nodded. "And when people are scared, they look for someone to blame." When they landed, reporters crowded the arrivals area, microphones flashing like lightning. Naomi moved through calmly, offering no statements, her face composed but unreadable. She wasn't angry, just resolute. At headquarters, Evelyn was waiting with a thick folder of documents. The memo was traced to an anonymous source within HR. She said, "We don't know who leaked it, but some of the staff are starting to question whether the reforms are sustainable. They're tired." Naomi sat, her posture still, her mind racing. "Change burns before it heals," she said quietly. "But I won't let this turn into a divide. Schedule a staff town hall, no press, just us." The next afternoon, hundreds of employees filled the auditorium. The air was heavy with uncertainty. Naomi stood alone at the center stage. No podium, no script. "I've seen the rumors," she began, "and I understand the fatigue. Reform is exhausting because it demands honesty. But let me remind you of something. Dignity isn't a brand. It's a responsibility. You're not working for a company. You're working for the future version of yourself, who will never have to apologize for looking away." Her tone was calm but steady, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "I never asked any of you to be perfect. I asked you to care. If that feels heavy, it's because caring has weight. But it's the kind of weight that builds strength, not chains." The room was silent. Then, somewhere in the middle, a hand rose. It was Joe Ramirez, the veteran mechanic. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice gruff but respectful. "I've seen more bosses talk about change than live it. You're living it. Don't let noise drown that out. We got your back." Applause rippled through the room, small at first, then growing until it filled the hall like thunder. Naomi's throat tightened, but she simply nodded. "Then let's keep flying," she said softly. Later that evening, Naomi sat in her office with Evelyn and Emily. The tension had eased, replaced by quiet determination. Evelyn handed her a cup of tea. "That was brilliant. You turned the room around without fighting them." Naomi smiled faintly. "You can't fight doubt with force. You answer it with truth." Emily leaned forward. "You know, you've become something of a symbol. Naomi, whether you like it or not, people see you as a mirror. How you handle this will shape how they handle every hardship that follows." Naomi looked thoughtful. "Then I'll handle it with grace, because grace isn't weakness, it's discipline." Across town, Melissa Hart watched the town hall replay online. She had been following the backlash, fearing that Naomi's kindness would be twisted into manipulation. As she saw Naomi standing firm, her voice steady and eyes unwavering, tears filled her eyes. She whispered to herself, "That's what real leadership looks like." The next morning, Melissa posted a public statement on her social media, the first since the incident. "I was the flight attendant who failed Dr. Naomi Carter. I pushed her when I should have listened. And yet, she became the reason I found my humanity again. The reforms at Orion Air aren't for marketing. They're for people like me, people who lost their way and were given a second chance. If you think kindness is fake, maybe it's because you've forgotten how real it feels." The post went viral within hours. The tone online shifted again, like wind changing direction. News anchors quoted her statement. Analysts called it one of the most powerful acts of accountability in corporate history. When Naomi saw the post, she sat quietly for a long time. Then she sent Melissa a short message. "Truth spoken with humility travels farther than power spoken with ego. Thank you." Days later, Naomi received an unexpected call from the Secretary of Transportation. "Dr. Carter," the voice said warmly, "your reforms have inspired several airlines to begin their own empathy programs. We're inviting you to join our advisory panel on passenger equity standards." Naomi smiled faintly. "If this helps make the sky a fairer place, I'll be there." After the call, she walked to the window. The Seattle rain was falling softly, each drop painting silver trails across the glass. She thought of everything that had happened, the humiliation, the storm, the redemption, the weight of expectation. She felt tired, but not weary. She felt the quiet strength of someone who had carried fire through the rain and still kept it burning. Evelyn entered, carrying a small envelope. "This just arrived. No return address." Naomi opened it carefully. Inside was a single handwritten note. "To Dr. Carter, I was on flight OA211 that day. I didn't speak up, though I should have. Watching you handle what happened changed how I treat people in my own life. Thank you for showing that power can be gentle." Naomi folded the note slowly, her heart full. "That," she said softly, "is why we keep going." That night, she closed her eyes and replayed the image that had started it all, the push, the gasp, the silence that followed. Except now, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of echoes of lessons learned, hearts changed, dignity restored. The sky outside cleared, revealing a thin streak of moonlight cutting across the horizon. Naomi whispered to herself, "Grace doesn't shout, it lasts." By early autumn, the world had caught up to Naomi Carter's movement. The Passenger Dignity Program had expanded beyond Orion Air. 5 other airlines had announced partnerships to adopt similar initiatives. and universities began requesting Naomi to speak on ethical leadership. Yet for all the recognition, she found herself growing quieter inside. Fame was never her pursuit. Her true measure of success was in the small transformations: the flight attendant who smiled for real, the passenger who saw humanity where there was once hierarchy. On a drizzly Seattle morning, Naomi walked through the airport terminal, unnoticed among the flow of travelers. She had learned to observe again, as she once did on that first flight under disguise. She saw a young attendant kneeling to comfort a child afraid of flying. She saw an older woman helping a man with his luggage without hesitation. These weren't staged acts. They were instinct now. It filled Naomi with a warmth that words could never capture. As she reached the gate for her upcoming flight to Chicago, where she would meet transportation officials to discuss federal policy, she spotted a familiar face: Melissa Hart, dressed modestly but confident, surrounded by a small group of new recruits. She was explaining the importance of emotional intelligence, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. When passengers act out. "It's not about us," Melissa said. "It's about fear, exhaustion, sometimes pain. We don't respond to their tone. We respond to their humanity." Naomi smiled faintly, standing back without interrupting. Melissa's transformation was the kind of redemption that didn't make headlines, but made history. When Melissa finished, she noticed Naomi watching and walked over with a mix of surprise and pride. "Dr. Carter, I didn't expect you here." Naomi nodded warmly. "You found your rhythm." "I see." Melissa's eyes softened. "You gave me the space to start again. That's something I'll never take for granted." "I didn't give you space," Naomi said gently. "You earned it by choosing to grow." Before boarding, Melissa handed her a folder. "These are reports from the new recruits. Some of their stories might interest you. One of them even said your speech made her switch careers." Naomi tucked the folder into her briefcase. "Thank you. Melissa, keep building what we started. The program needs leaders who understand both sides of the aisle." The flight to Chicago was smooth, but Naomi's mind was restless. The weight of constant expectation pressed against her chest. Every interview, every policy discussion, people looked to her for answers, as if one woman could rewrite the culture of an entire industry. She often wondered what would happen when her name faded from the headlines. Would kindness stay, or would it dissolve once the world moved on to another story when she landed? Evelyn was already waiting at the terminal. "I thought I'd surprise you," Evelyn said, hugging her lightly. "You looked like you needed backup." Naomi smiled, tired but grateful. "You read me too well." They drove to the hotel, passing the glittering skyline reflected in Lake Michigan. As they checked in, Evelyn handed her a tablet. "Before tomorrow's meeting, you should see this." Naomi tapped the screen. It was a new viral video, a clip of a flight attendant on another airline gently defusing a tense confrontation between two passengers. The comments beneath were full of praise. But what struck Naomi was the caption at the top: "Trained under the Carter Principles." She leaned back, eyes glistening. "They're calling it the Carter Principles." Evelyn nodded, smiling. "Looks like your words have taken on a life of their own." Naomi sighed, conflicted. "I didn't want this to be about me." "It's not," Evelyn said softly. "It's about what you reminded people to remember." The next day, Naomi attended the federal policy meeting with senior transportation officials and airline executives. The room was polished and tense, filled with the hum of politics disguised as progress. Charts and projections lined the screens. But when Naomi began to speak, the tone shifted instantly. We can legislate safety and efficiency, she said, but we cannot legislate empathy. That must be taught not by rules, but by example. Every passenger interaction is a reflection of who we are as a society. If we tolerate indifference in the skies, we'll mirror it on the ground. One official, a gray-haired man named Senator Lawson, raised his hand. Dr. Carter, you've proven reform is possible. But what happens when leadership changes? How do you make sure your principles survive? Naomi paused before answering. You can't immortalize a leader, she said softly, but you can immortalize a culture. That's why we're building systems, not statues. The goal isn't to remember me, it's to forget me, because decency becomes the default. Her words hung in the air. Even the skeptical executives nodded quietly. After the session, Naomi stepped outside into the cool breeze of the Chicago afternoon. A group of airline trainees waiting near the entrance recognized her. One young man approached, holding out his phone shyly. Dr. Carter, I just wanted to say thank you. My mother's a flight attendant. She almost quit last year because of how harsh things got. Your reforms gave her hope again. Naomi smiled warmly. Tell her she's the reason this works. People like her keep the skies human. As she walked back to her car, Evelyn caught up beside her. You know, you've done more in 1 year than most people do in a lifetime. Naomi laughed softly. And yet, I feel like I'm only halfway through the climb. That evening, they attended a dinner hosted by the city's aviation committee. Among the guests was Marcus Hill, now a journalism fellow in Chicago. When he spotted Naomi, his face lit up. Dr. Carter, I didn't think you'd remember me. I never forget people who make history with courage, Naomi said warmly. They sat together for a few minutes, Marcus sharing his project stories about working-class workers, silent kindnesses in ordinary places. You made me realize reporting doesn't always have to expose darkness, he said. Sometimes it can just reveal light. Naomi nodded, pride softening her features. That's the kind of journalism the world needs, truth that heals, not wounds. Later that night, Naomi returned to her hotel room, exhausted but unable to sleep. She stepped out onto the balcony, overlooking the city lights. From up high, the traffic below looked like glowing veins pulsing through a living body. Humanity was flawed, but still beautiful in its attempt to connect. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Melissa. One of the new trainees just told me she used to dread her job. Now she says it feels like purpose. Thank you for believing in me so I could believe in others. Naomi typed back, keep that purpose alive. Melissa. That's how change stays in motion. Before going to bed. Naomi opened the folder Melissa had handed her earlier. Inside were letters from new recruits raw, heartfelt confessions. One wrote about growing up in poverty and wanting to make travelers feel seen. Another described surviving discrimination and finding hope through the program. The last one read, When I put on the Orion uniform, I remember Dr. Carter's words. Serve people like you're protecting their dignity, not their ticket. Naomi closed the folder, her heart swelling with quiet pride. This was the legacy she wanted, not fame, but ripple effects that reached strangers she'd never meet. The next morning, as she prepared to leave Chicago, she looked in the mirror and saw the faint lines of exhaustion beneath her eyes. But she also saw peace. The kind of peace that comes not from success, but from purpose lived fully. Evelyn knocked gently. Ready to head back, Naomi smiled. Always. As they walked toward the airport, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the skyline in light. Naomi turned to Evelyn and said, We started with turbulence. Now we're finally learning how to fly steady. And Evelyn replied softly, "That's because you taught everyone that flying right starts with landing right with empathy." Naomi looked out toward the runways ahead, the sound of departing planes echoing like heartbeats. The movement she'd started had become more than policy, more than corporate culture. It had become a mirror for humanity itself. The first chill of November swept through Seattle, bringing with it the muted gold of falling leaves and the quiet weight of reflection. Orion Air's headquarters, once a symbol of routine corporate order, now pulsed with new life. The Carter Principles had become a company mantra painted on training room walls, printed on flight manuals, quoted by journalists. Naomi Carter's face appeared on magazine covers under titles like "The Woman Who Humanized the Skies." Yet behind her calm smile, she carried a storm few could see. The success had grown too quickly. Rapid expansion meant cracks were starting to show again, new hires unprepared for the emotional expectations. Middle managers overwhelmed by the new cultural demands. Naomi's reforms had ignited hearts, but sustaining that fire required more than vision. It required endurance. On a gray Thursday morning, Evelyn Shaw entered Naomi's office, her expression concerned. "We've had our first major backlash," she said, setting a folder on the desk. "A regional crew in Denver refused to attend the latest empathy workshop. They're calling it emotional labor overload. Their union is threatening to strike unless we scale back the training hours." Naomi rubbed her temples. "How many employees? 216. Evelyn replied, "And the media already knows." Naomi leaned back in her chair, eyes unfocused. It was always going to happen. Change tests patience before it rewards faith. Evelyn sighed. "People are saying you've asked too much of them, that compassion shouldn't be mandatory." Naomi looked up, her gaze sharp but gentle. "Then they've misunderstood everything. Compassion was never the rule. It's the reason we exist." That evening, Naomi held a private video conference with the Denver staff. Their faces appeared on the screen tired, defensive, wary. She didn't begin with reprimands. She began with silence. A pause that made space for truth to emerge. "I've read your letters," she said finally. "I hear your frustration. I won't dismiss it, but tell me, when did kindness start feeling like an extra chore instead of a choice?" No one spoke at first. Then a young attendant named Marisol spoke up. "Dr. Carter, it's not that we don't care. It's just, every day feels heavier now. We're carrying passengers' emotions, management's expectations, and our own exhaustion. We're tired of being the face of everyone's redemption." Naomi listened carefully, nodding. "That's fair," she said softly. "Empathy without support becomes a burden, not a gift. We built the heart of this company, but maybe we forgot to strengthen its spine." She paused, letting her words settle. "Here's my promise. We'll revise the program, not to make it easier, but to make it human for you too." The call ended with quiet nods. It wasn't victory, but it was understanding, and that was always the real goal. Later that night, Naomi met with Emily Zhao and Melissa Hart to discuss the changes. The three women sat in Naomi's office long after midnight, surrounded by scattered papers and empty coffee cups. "We need to integrate rest into the curriculum," Emily suggested. "Emotional regulation, mental recovery. We can't just teach people how to care. We have to teach them how to refill after caring." Melissa nodded thoughtfully. "And maybe we pair every empathy module with a resilience one. That way, kindness doesn't become exhaustion." Naomi smiled faintly, looking at them both. "This is why I trust you. You're not protecting a program. You're protecting people." A few days later, Naomi announced the adjustments publicly in a company-wide meeting. Her tone was firm but warm. "True compassion doesn't mean burning ourselves out to prove we care," she said. "It means staying strong enough to care again tomorrow." The message resonated deeply. Instead of weakening her leadership, it strengthened her credibility. The Denver strike threat dissolved within the week, replaced by gratitude. Employees sent messages saying they finally felt seen again, not just as instruments of change, but as human beings within it. But while Naomi's internal world found its balance, the external one began to stir. A sensationalist tabloid released a piece titled "The Hidden Cost of the Carter Revolution." It painted a distorted narrative, long work hours, emotional fatigue, and claims that Naomi's ideals were turning flight crews into therapists. The story spread fast, feeding skepticism in online forums and talk shows. Evelyn stormed into Naomi's office the morning it broke. "They're twisting everything you've built," she fumed. "We need to issue a statement right now." Naomi remained composed. "Let them shout," she said quietly. "Truth doesn't defend itself through noise. It proves itself through time." "Naomi, this could spiral," Evelyn warned. Naomi turned to her with calm certainty. "I didn't start this to be loved. I started it to be right." Meanwhile, Melissa read the article in disbelief. She felt anger bubbling in her chest, not for herself, but for Naomi, who had given her back her dignity when no one else would. Without hesitation, she reached out to Marcus Hill. "Marcus," she said over the phone, "you're a journalist now. You've seen what Naomi's work has done. I need you to write the truth, not as PR, but as humanity." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you've got. I'll tell the story the way it deserves to be told." Within 48 hours, Marcus's article went live under the title, "The Grace That Flies: How Naomi Carter's Quiet Revolution Changed Us." It wasn't dramatic, it was honest. He told the story from the beginning, the shove, the humiliation, the silence, the redemption. He quoted employees, passengers, even critics who'd come to respect the results. His final line read, "She didn't raise her voice to change the world. She listened, and the world followed." The article went viral, drowning out the noise of cynicism. News anchors began referencing it. Social media lit up with gratitude. Naomi's inbox overflowed again, not with accusations this time, but with testimonies from people who said the story changed how they treated others. That evening, Naomi found Marcus's number in her phone and called him directly. "You didn't just defend me," she said softly. "You defended the truth." Marcus's voice was humble. "I just told the story you refused to brag about." When she hung up, Naomi sat back in her chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Rain streaked the glass again, blurring the city lights. Change, she thought, was like weather. It came in storms, but it also cleared the air. A few days later, Naomi received an invitation from the United Nations to speak at their upcoming Global Leadership Summit. The theme was compassion as infrastructure. She smiled at the irony. What had started as a simple act of dignity on a plane had now become a conversation shaping the world's understanding of leadership itself. That night, before leaving her office, Naomi walked through the training center one last time. The lights were dim, the halls quiet. On one wall hung a mural painted by employees showing a pair of wings made of countless small paper hearts. Above it, a quote, "Respect is not policy, it's practice." She stood there for a while, hand on the cool surface, overwhelmed by the simple truth that all revolutions begin this way, not with grand speeches or power, but with the courage to act decently when no one expects it. As she left the building, Evelyn caught up to her at the door. Heading home, Naomi smiled tiredly. For a few hours? Yes. But tomorrow, we start planning the next chapter. Evelyn chuckled. You never rest, do you? Naomi looked out at the rain-slick streets and replied quietly, Not while there's still turbulence in the world. Winter arrived early that year, dressing Seattle in a thin mist that blurred the skyline like an unfinished painting. The cold carried with it a quiet calm, a contrast to the whirlwind of the past months. Naomi Carter sat in her office, wrapped in a soft gray shawl, the city lights reflecting off the glass behind her. Her desk was cluttered with reports, invitations, and handwritten letters from employees around the world. The global reach of the Carter principles had taken even her by surprise. What began as an act of stillness on a single flight had become a movement stretching across continents. Yet, even amid the victories, Naomi felt the pull of solitude more acutely than ever. She had built something vast and beautiful, but the higher her influence rose, the lonelier the altitude became. Leadership was like flight. It demanded balance between elevation and gravity. Evelyn entered quietly, her arms full of folders. You've got interviews lined up all week. The United Nations Summit is confirmed for next month, and Boeing just sent an offer. They want to collaborate on empathy-centered cockpit training. Naomi smiled faintly. The irony isn't lost on me. A few months ago, no one thought empathy belonged anywhere near an airline cockpit. Evelyn chuckled. Now they're calling it a safety strategy. Naomi stood and stretched, gazing at the snow beginning to fall outside. Maybe that's how real revolutions work. They start with hearts and end up in handbooks. That evening, she met with Emily Zhao and Melissa Hart for dinner at a small cafe near the water. The air smelled of cinnamon and roasted coffee, the kind of warmth that softens the edges of exhaustion. The three women sat by the window, watching snowflakes drift past the glow of the street lamps. Emily spoke first, excitement in her eyes. Naomi, guess what Delta just called? They want to send their training team to observe our next workshop. They said our program has the lowest passenger complaint rate in the industry. Naomi smiled. That's your success, Emily. You took a framework and turned it into a culture. Emily blushed slightly. It's everyone's success. You gave us the courage to lead with compassion. Melissa stirred her coffee, her expression thoughtful. I keep thinking about how far this has gone. Every time someone talks about the Carter way, I think about the person I was that day on the flight. I used to feel shame when people mentioned it. Now, it feels like a story I had to live through to find my purpose. Naomi reached across the table, her voice gentle. You turned regret into redemption. Melissa, that's rarer than forgiveness. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the faint hum of music from the cafe's old radio. Then Emily leaned forward. Naomi, there's something else. I think you should tell your full story at the UN summit, not just about the reforms, but about what you felt that day. People know the facts, but they don't know you. Naomi hesitated. I've always wanted the story to be about the system, not the person. That's exactly why it should be you, Emily said softly. People need to see that power and vulnerability can coexist. They need to see the human who built the change. Naomi didn't respond right away. She looked out the window again, watching a plane take off in the distance, its lights vanishing into the gray sky. Maybe you're right, she said finally. Maybe it's time to stop hiding behind professionalism and speak as a person who once felt invisible too. The next morning, Naomi returned to headquarters early. The building was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies thought. She walked through the halls lined with framed photos from the Passenger Dignity Program, employees laughing, passengers hugging flight attendants, children visiting cockpits. It looked almost like a family album. As she entered the main atrium, she noticed a new mural in progress, a mosaic of tiny tiles forming a portrait of a woman standing before a plane. Her hand extended toward another figure. The caption read, "Grace in Motion." Naomi smiled, realizing it was her likeness, though she hadn't posed for it. Joe Ramirez, the senior mechanic, appeared beside her, wiping paint off his hands. "Surprise," he said with a grin. "We wanted to make something for you before the summit. The wings aren't finished yet." Naomi's eyes softened. "Joe, it's beautiful, but you didn't have to." He cut her off gently. "We wanted to. You made us proud to wear these uniforms again." Her throat tightened, emotion pressing against composure. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've all made me proud, too." Later that day, Naomi sat in her office preparing her keynote draft. Her speech was less about leadership and more about memory, how ordinary people could carry extraordinary courage when treated with respect. She wrote slowly, carefully, wanting every word to feel alive. Halfway through her notes, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus Hill. "Dr. Carter," he said when she answered. "I'm in New York covering a story on airport reform. I just spoke to a gate agent who said your policies saved her job. She handled a discrimination complaint with empathy instead of confrontation. Thought you should know." Naomi smiled faintly. "That's the kind of story worth printing." "Marcus." He laughed softly. "I already did." The headline reads, "When Decency Becomes Policy." After the call, Naomi leaned back in her chair, letting his words sink in. The movement had grown beyond her name. It had become a living ecosystem of conscience. That evening, she joined Evelyn on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. The wind was crisp, carrying the faint sound of departing aircraft. Evelyn handed her a glass of wine. "To turbulence," she said with a smirk. Naomi raised her glass, and to calm skies that follow. They clinked glasses and stood in silence, watching a plane ascend into the night. "Do you ever wonder," Evelyn said after a moment, "what would have happened if you'd lost your temper that day? If you'd shouted instead of staying silent?" Naomi's eyes followed the blinking lights above. "Sometimes, but anger only burns what it touches. Grace builds what anger destroys." Evelyn smiled. "You're a poet, Naomi?" "No," Naomi said softly. "Just someone who learned that dignity is the quietest form of strength." In the following days, preparations for the UN summit intensified. Media outlets speculated on what Naomi's message would be. Some called her the architect of ethical aviation, others the accidental reformer. But Naomi avoided all interviews. She preferred stillness before storms. The night before her flight to New York, she received a small package with no sender address. Inside was a worn airline tag, the same design used years ago, engraved with the words Flight OA211. Where it all began, there was no note, but Naomi knew who had sent it. She held it in her palm for a long time, then smiled faintly. That single moment of humiliation had become the seed of transformation. She placed the tag on her desk beside her speech draft, a silent reminder of how far grace can travel. The next morning, she boarded her flight to New York. As the plane taxied down the runway, Naomi looked out the window. The sun was breaking through a layer of cloud, casting golden light across the horizon. For the first time in a long while, She allowed herself to exhale fully. She whispered quietly, almost to herself, "The sky remembers." The morning of the United Nations summit broke clear over Manhattan, a rare, brilliant blue sky arching above the city. Naomi Carter stood before her hotel window, dressed in a navy suit, her speech tucked neatly into a leather folder. Down below, the streets pulsed with life horns, footsteps, conversations, all blending into the hum of a world that never slept. For a moment, she watched in stillness, her reflection superimposed against the skyline. It struck her how small one person seemed against the vast machinery of the world, and yet how one act could shift its rhythm forever. Evelyn knocked lightly before entering, her presence steady as always. "They're ready for you downstairs," she said with a smile. "You sure you don't want me to review your notes one last time?" Naomi shook her head. "No notes today, just truth." Evelyn nodded approvingly. "Then let the world hear it." The ride to the UN headquarters was quiet, both women lost in thought. Flashbulbs flared as their car pulled up to the entrance, reporters calling Naomi's name, cameras glinting like a sea of restless stars. She moved past them gracefully, her expression composed, but warm. The hall inside was immense, filled with diplomats, CEOs, and policymakers from around the globe. The flags of nations framed the stage like a chorus of colors. As Naomi stepped up to the podium, applause rippled through the chamber. She waited until it subsided, then began in her calm, deliberate voice. "Almost 2 years ago, I boarded a flight as an ordinary passenger. I wasn't wearing a title or a name tag. I wasn't anyone special. But that day, someone decided I didn't belong where I was seated. She pushed me aside, not because of what I did, but because of what she thought I was." Her words hung in the air, quiet and heavy. She continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. That moment could have become just another headline about discrimination. Instead, it became a question about how much humanity we lose when we stop seeing each other as equals. I didn't shout that day. I didn't fight back in anger. I chose silence, not as surrender, but as clarity, because sometimes the world hears silence louder than noise. She paused, her voice softening. In that silence, something began, a reckoning, a reform, and eventually, a realization that power means nothing if it can't protect dignity. The policies we write, the systems we build, the jobs we perform, they all mean nothing if they forget the human being at their center. The audience was still, listening with the kind of attention that can't be demanded, only earned. Naomi went on, her words measured but full of quiet fire. "People have called this movement the Carter Principles, but they're not mine. They belong to every person who has chosen compassion over convenience, grace over control, to every flight attendant who learned to see fear behind anger, to every passenger who chose patience over pride, to every leader who decided that accountability could coexist with kindness. This was never my revolution. It was yours." For a brief moment, she glanced down at the worn airline tag sitting on the podium. Flight OA211, its metal edge catching the light. "We started with one flight," she said softly. "And we learned something simple but profound. The sky doesn't belong to corporations or countries. It belongs to everyone who believes that respect should never need permission." When she finished, there was a silence deeper than applause. Then, slowly, people began to stand, first a few, then the entire hall rising in ovation. The sound swelled, echoing against the marble walls. Evelyn, standing at the edge of the stage, wiped her eyes discreetly. Afterward, Naomi stepped down, greeted by a rush of handshakes and congratulations. Diplomats approached with proposals for global ethics initiatives. Journalists asked for sound bites, and CEOs spoke of partnership opportunities. But Naomi moved through them with quiet humility, offering warm smiles. No theatrics. Her work wasn't about fame. It was about endurance. Outside, the winter air bit sharp against her skin. She stood for a moment beneath the UN flag, its fabric rippling in the wind, and looked up. The sky was wide and impossibly clear. Later that evening, she met Evelyn, Emily, and Melissa for dinner at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The skyline glittered like constellations. The world spread open before them. Marcus Hill joined them midway through, carrying his notepad, ever the observer. To Naomi, Evelyn toasted, raising her glass, for teaching us that leadership doesn't shout, it listens. Melissa lifted hers too, smiling, and for proving that grace is stronger than shame. Naomi clinked glasses with each of them, her smile soft and full. To all of you, she said, for reminding me that courage multiplies when it's shared. As they ate, laughter filled the space between them, easy, genuine laughter, the kind that comes after long storms. For a few hours, they allowed themselves to simply be human, not reformers or symbols, just friends who had weathered something extraordinary together. When the evening ended, Naomi lingered alone for a while, standing by the railing. The city stretched endlessly below, and for the first time in months she felt still. Emily came beside her quietly. "You did it," she said softly. Naomi turned toward her. "No, we did it. I just lit the match. You all carried the flame." Emily smiled. "And where do we go from here?" Naomi looked toward the horizon, where planes blinked like moving stars. "Forward," she said simply. "Always forward, until empathy becomes instinct, not training." A week later, Naomi returned to Seattle. The air was crisp, the familiar scent of sea and pine drifting through the wind. When she entered Orion Air headquarters, she found the lobby transformed. The mosaic mural Joe Ramirez had been working on was complete. The wings now shimmered with hundreds of small, silver tiles, each engraved with the name of an employee who had completed the Passenger Dignity Program. In the center of the mural was a quote she had written long ago, but never published. "We rise by remembering that every seat, every story, every person matters." Naomi stood there for a long time, overwhelmed by the weight of it. The employees began to gather quietly around her: pilots, attendants, mechanics, clerks, each one standing shoulder to shoulder, no speeches, no ceremony, just presence. Finally, Joe spoke from the back. "You told us the sky belongs to everyone. We believed you." Naomi turned, emotion filling her voice. "Then we've already won." That night, as she left the building, she stopped at the edge of the runway. A plane roared into the air, its lights slicing through the darkness. She watched until it became a speck, then vanished entirely into the clouds. She thought of that first flight of humiliation turned to hope, of pain transformed into purpose. A single tear slipped down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of release. "Fly well," she whispered to the sky, as though speaking to every soul touched by her journey. As she walked back to her car, the wind carried the distant sound of another plane taking off, followed by another and another. For a moment, it almost sounded like applause. The world would keep moving. Storms would come and go. But Naomi knew this truth would endure empathy. Once awakened, never really lands. It keeps flying, heart to heart, unseen but unforgettable. And somewhere high above, under that vast, eternal blue, the sky itself seemed to whisper her message back softly, endlessly, like an echo of grace. Life has a way of testing our grace in the most unexpected moments. Naomi Carter's story reminds us that true strength isn't found in anger or retaliation. It's found in restraint, in choosing compassion when the world expects fury. Respect and empathy are not luxuries. They are the foundation of every decent society. We all face moments when we're judged unfairly, dismissed, or silenced. But how we respond in those moments defines who we become. When Naomi stayed calm in the face of humiliation, she didn't just protect her dignity, she transformed an entire culture. For those of us who've lived long enough to see both kindness and cruelty, this story is a gentle call to remember. People may forget your title, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Justice doesn't always roar, it often whispers, through quiet courage and the choice to heal instead of harm. Let us carry that lesson into our everyday lives, to listen more, judge less, and lead with decency. Because when we treat others with respect, we make the world a little kinder for everyone. Thank you for watching this story with us. If Naomi's journey moved you, if it reminded you of the power of quiet courage and human dignity, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us tell more stories that inspire empathy, challenge injustice, and remind us of the best parts of being human. Stay kind, stay curious, and never forget even the smallest act of grace can change someone's world. We'll see you in the next story.